International Media Support is an organization that believes good journalism globally is under pressure. We have existed for the past 17 years, and we continue to support the development of good journalism. We usually say safeguarding good journalism is our key mandate. We recognize that in recent years, good journalism has been under pressure. Good journalism is important because people need access, people around the world need access to reliable information. Good journalism is also important because you need to keep governments, repressive regimes accountable. And those two things is what IMS is all about. We work in 25 countries around the world. We tend to work in the most repressive countries, and also countries that are undergoing conflict. So it's countries like Somalia, it's Afghanistan, it's Syria, Iraq, Myanmar, countries in the Arab world, Egypt, Tunisia. Good journalism is under pressure from various places. Globally, political rights is under pressure, and journalism is suffering from the sort of general trend that we see, where governments, even in countries that are developing, that have also achieved good and positive economic results, is they tend to ignore political rights, which means countries like China, in countries like South Africa, in countries like Russia, journalism is, and especially critical investigative journalism, is under serious pressure. I see a development that is where those who suppress, harass journalists are becoming more sophisticated. There's also no prosecution taking place of perpetrators, which almost we tend to see almost 95% impunity of harassments and killings of journalists, which means there's perpetrators go unpunished, which is a global trend. That hasn't changed. It has, on the contrary, increased, and the international community seems to have no means of stopping this, which is of course great concern to us. On the other hand, you also see journalists finding new ways of coming together, making sure that stories are being produced, that investigations are carried out. This is the positive side of developments in the past 17 years. I think recent investigations, as we all have followed them through the Paradise Papers and the Panama Papers, shows that even a relatively loose but persistent network have managed to uncover corruption in a manner and in a scale that nobody expected just 5 or 10 years ago. It's the issue about killing of journalists and oppression is different depending on whether you are working in a conflict. Still, most journalists that are killed, it happens in conflict. So you would say in more direct oppressive states, then I would say there is a difference. Although, as I usually say, the bastards, they have a tendency to learn from the bastards. So they are copying each other's oppressive measures. China has been very good in exporting oppressive and surveillance techniques. The same have Russia, which means that many countries in the third world, whether it's Zimbabwe in Africa, or military regimes in Asia, Latin America, they tend to learn from those methodologies and surveillance techniques that have been developed by Russia and China. We tend to connect in those who work inside and those who work outside, those who stay behind and continue to either operate undercover under often very difficult circumstances, but that they benefit from being linked up to those journalists that have moved into exile. We support journalists so they can work safely. We never only train or support them to do investigations, we always also make sure that they can work safely. It would be a serious mistake if we didn't. The situation in Myanmar is getting more and more serious. Special Rapporteur for Human Rights have indicated, first of all, UN Special Rapporteur for Human Rights has been prevented from visiting Myanmar, in itself a very serious issue. The international community, of course, is following closely what is happening in Rakhine and with the Rohingyas, and of course that by itself has established a completely new situation in the country on a scale that nobody had expected just 3 or 4 years ago. And this has also influenced journalists, especially journalists, investigative journalists that have looked into the issues around what is happening with the Rohingyas. This was unexpected, and I think it's probably the quickest and steepest downfall of any global human rights icon that has ever seen the world has ever seen, this is not preventing us from working there and not preventing us from continuing to trust that those journalists that actually came out of the many years of military control and military repression still can play a role and will be able to play a role. At the moment, it doesn't look too good. Journalists are being imprisoned, prosecuted, and ironically prosecuted based on old colonial laws. So it's a very sad and serious situation. Accountability becomes a key issue moving forward if we continue to believe that democracy is the best form of governance. At the moment, that picture looks grim. It seems like now, in contrast to past, it's possible to have economic development without democracy, and this is probably the biggest challenge that also journalism is facing. That journalists normally is a fundamental part of making sure that democracy thrives, and but if the global international community is losing faith in democracy as a way of governing our world, it of course becomes increasingly also difficult for journalists to make their case. But I believe seriously, and I'm building it on a deep understanding of many of those very, very difficult countries and environments we work in, that irregardless of how repressive governments are, journalists, individuals are finding a way to publish, and this will continue.